morning. Oh, they did not give me a lapel. I cannot move, right? They did not mic me, so if... I would like to thank Kim and Charlie, Debbie, and Mike for inviting me again to speak at this event. Today I'm going to focus on two issues. The first one on the sources of volatility in energy markets. The topic seems like easy and people think they know it, but you will see today that it is a very complex issue. And then I'm going to debunk the narrative that we are going to have a massive surplus in the oil market. And at the same time, I am going to talk about the issue of oil on water. How many of you are familiar with the term oil on water? Raise your hand, please. Okay. Do you hear me now? Okay. How many of you heard the term oil on water? Raise your hand. Okay. Oil on water, basically, this is oil on tankers that is going from one destination to the other. And if the tanker reaches a certain point and stays there without delivering the oil over 7 days, then it becomes floating storage. But today, when I'm going to talk about oil on water, I'm going to talk only about oil in transit, because this has become a big news for the oil bears. And I'm going to debunk that today. So let's start with the first one. The first issue, by the way, everything I'm talking about today is written. If you'd like to take a picture of this, this has all the links to where these things are written, and it has my contact information. So when we talk about volatility of energy sources, what I'm saying here is the volatility increased significantly in recent years. And the question is why? Right now in the oil market, we don't see that much volatility, but generally speaking, when we talk about energy markets, volatility is way higher than in the past. And think about it this way. We all know that weather is seasonal. We also know that within each season, the weather is very volatile. Yet, some people on the far left of climate change, they say that the situation is going to get worse over time, which means that the weather is going to be more volatile. Yet, they want us to depend more on solar, which depend on the weather. They want us to depend more on wind, which depend on weather. They want us to depend more on biofuel, which depend on weather. They want us to depend more on hydro, which depend on weather. So you can see where the volatility is. Weather is volatile, and we are moving toward energy sources that is dependent on weather. So this is one source of volatility. However, when we talk about the sources right now, it is very clear that the trade wars, the tariffs, are increasing that volatility. But it's not really the trade wars and the tariffs on its own. It's really the flip-flop of policies, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow when it comes to trade wars and tariffs. So it is those sudden changes in policies that are creating this volatility. And as you all know, not only in energy markets, almost in all markets. If you move forward and avoid the political issues related to that, we have a period of 4 years where policies of climate change were pushed in our face by force, legally, by the Information Reduction Act. And then when President Trump came to office, he is reversing that. Here's the problem. Many of those projects basically are designed for 25 years or 30 years, while our presidential cycle is only 4 years. You can see where the volatility is. One president wanted this way, the other president wanted this way. But the issue here is these projects survive on government subsidies. You lower subsidies, you eliminate subsidies, you end up with a problem. So we are seeing all kind of volatility in the solar industry, in the wind industry, in the EV industry. And you add to it national security issues, because when governments adopted those climate change policies, they did not look at the whole picture. They just went in one direction and then a few years later said, oh, sorry, now we are dependent on China for all the critical minerals needed for wind, needed for solar, needed for EVs, needed for batteries. And we don't want to depend on China. So under the national security issues right now, we are changing policies again. And that's another source of volatility. You add to all these volatilities that I'm talking about, you add the financial issues. And this is kind of a very, very ironic issue when you think about it. In 2017, I was invited to a conference, mostly lawyers, in Austin, Texas, and I spoke about EVs. And I predicted almost everything you see today. And I said at that time that watch governments imposing fees or taxes on EVs to replace gasoline taxes. Since then, I've never been invited to that conference again. Now it happened. We see that most states and many countries basically are literally imposing fees, additional fees on electric vehicles to compensate for the losses of gasoline taxes. Because those states and other countries, they need the gasoline or fuel taxes to maintain roads and bridges, etc. And now if you don't have them, how you are going to maintain that? The Europeans alone, they collect over $500 billion in fuel taxes every year. How they are going to compensate for that if they go fully electric? So that's a financial issue. And so you see the flip-flop here and the source of volatility. But here is the most ironic thing about this. They told people in several states and several countries, if you install solar on your rooftop, you don't have to pay bills, and if you produce more than what you need, you get paid. And they did. And all of a sudden, now utilities are going to the state and said, hold on just a second, how we are going to maintain the grid, because we are not collecting revenues, the states are not collecting taxes, and therefore they cannot maintain the grid. And say, okay, what you are going to do? Oh, we are going to tax rooftop solar. So you can see where the volatility is coming from here. Narratives, forecasts. We've been seeing this manufactured bearish narrative in the oil market. And when I say manufactured, I'm going to show you how it is manufactured. For the recent months, basically, we've seen predictions since last April saying that oil prices will drop to the 30s and 40s because the group of 8 in OPEC Plus is increasing production, because they are unwinding the voluntary cuts. Well, they already unwound 2.2 million barrels a day, and prices are still in the 60s. I'm talking about Brent. We did not go to 30s and 40s, but that's part of the bearish narrative. We've seen the major banks, and we've seen the IEA, the International Energy Agency, talking about this. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, predict that we are going to have the largest surplus in history next year in the oil market. Largest surplus in history. I don't have COVID. I don't have a recession. I don't have any of that. Yes, I'm going to have a surplus more than that as oil demand grow. Here's the problem. Surplus means storage is going up. I don't have enough storage in the world for that. And if I cannot store it, then it's not going to exist. Besides the fact, who is going to buy it? If they cannot store it, why they are going to buy it? But again, this is a manufactured and entrenched bearishness in the market. So the IEA expects that this year, oil demand will grow, global oil demand will grow by about 700,000 barrels a day. OPEC thinks it's about 1.3 million barrels a day. Our forecast is 1.1 million barrels a day. But who believes the IEA? Let's go over the history. In November 2022, the IEA says we are going to revise up all our previous forecasts of global oil demand up. Listen to this. Since 2007. Since 2007. For 15 years, they've been wrong. 15 years in a row, they've been wrong. So they revised all their previous estimates from 2007 to 2021 up. So they've been pushing the narrative for a long time that we don't need the oil, there is a flood of oil, our climate change policies are successful, so you can see how oil demand declined. No apology, and no one got fired. So 15 years of being wrong. Then last May, they said, whoops, our forecasts for 2022, 23, and 24 were wrong. We underestimated demand by 350 million barrels. 350 million. So 15 years wrong, and now they added 3 more years, so they've been wrong for 18 years. Then last August, they said, whoops, our estimate for growth in demand in Mexico was wrong by 100,000 barrels a day. Since when? Since 2020. The IEA in 2015 made a prediction for global oil demand by 2025. We are in 2025. According to the IEA, that the oil demand right now is higher than their previous estimate in 2015 by 3.2 million barrels a day. Who is going to believe the IEA after this? You've seen the record. So this is a manufactured bearishness. But someone might say, well, look at the Goldman Sachs of the world. All of them are bearish. Yes, because they use the IEA numbers. There is something we call circular information. Circular information, when you have one source of information, but it becomes widespread, and people believe it's true because it's widespread and it's been reported all over. But when you investigate, you find out it comes from one source. So if you are a researcher and you've been following the IEA numbers and you've been buying their data and you have their data sets for 18 years and 18 years been wrong and you have not adjusted your data when they did adjust their data, all your forecasts are wrong, whether you are Goldman Sachs or anyone else. So that is the manufactured bearishness. You add to it the media, and all the media and what they are talking about. Let me just tell you about the story about the media here. While the media was fixated with OPEC and Saudi Arabia and how they are increasing production and that is bearish, they did forget several things that I'm going to talk about shortly. They did forget that Brazil's exports declined by about 500,000 barrels a day, and they never reported that. But they reported every barrel that's been increased by OPEC and Saudi Arabia. So you have the IEA, you have the banks, and then you have them supported by the media, and then reality is different. So you can see where the source of volatility is. We have another issue leading to that volatility. If you look around the world right now, what do you see? We have, for the last 20 years, the role of solar and wind was very limited. The role of biofuel being very limited. But now it's widespread worldwide. We are seeing some sort of substitution that we have never seen before. To give you a true example, all of a sudden, wind stops in the UK or in Northern Europe. And they depend heavily on wind. Now there is a total panic. We are going to have power shortages. What we are going to do, we are going to compensate. We are going to fire up those gas turbines, and we are going to generate electricity from gas. Gas prices go through the roof, electricity prices go through the roof. Consequently, LNG prices go up, but they go up worldwide. And we start shifting those tankers between Europe and Asia because they are going to go to the highest price market. And not every country can afford that. We've seen it in China, we've seen it in India. What they are going to do, they'll start shifting to coal. Remember, it started in England by wind stopping there, and we end up using more coal in India as a result. You see that substitution that we never had that before. And add to it that LNG, some of it is sold in the spot market, and it's extremely volatile. And because it is in the spot market, we've seen it seasonally, how we've seen tankers basically literally halfway near the Cape of Hope in Africa, and it's going to Asia, and all of a sudden it shifts back and goes to Europe. That's part of the volatility that we see. And then the last one, and it really sounds funny when you talk about it. They insist that biofuel is green energy. We've seen it in Indonesia, we've seen it in Brazil, you heard all those stories, you can Google it if you are not familiar with it. To get the biofuel, they burned massive forests so they can plant the plants that produce the biofuel, regardless of that. The problem is, when you talk about hydropower, you talk about biofuel. If you have a drought, and those droughts are very common around the world, you have a serious problem. You don't have enough electricity produced from hydro, then they have to switch. And that substitution that I've been talking about will work throughout. In fact, it might lead to higher oil consumption because some factories will resort to private generation as a result of that. And for biofuel, if you don't have enough rain, then you don't have the good crop that you are looking for. How you are going to substitute? You resort to fossil fuel, although I don't like this expression, but you resort to that. I am at a disadvantage here because of limited time, so I'm going to flip those quickly just to debunk the bearish narrative and talk about that oil and water. This slide basically shows various forecasts, and the most important part here is you can see on the left that the IEA is very bearish when it comes to demand relative to others here. And you can see how bearish because they expect non-OPEC plus production to increase. And the issue here is this, just to show you how it is manufactured narrative. The IEA expects US oil demand to increase by 90,000 barrels a day this year. We are right now in October, so the year is almost over. And oil demand in the United States have grown more than 3 times the IEA estimate. Yet the IEA continue to be bearish. I'm going to go over those quickly. one of the issues when we talk about bearishness, why oil prices have not declined to $30 as they expected. They ignored many things. One of them is, in OPEC Plus members, demand for oil increases substantially in the summer because of the demand for cooling. This is an example from Saudi Arabia, and you can see the increase in demand during the summer. Sometimes that increase is substantial. If you look at OPEC Plus, OPEC production, it did not increase as much it's been announced. So we've seen the announcements from the group of 8 in OPEC Plus saying we are going to increase production by this much. But this is really an increase in quota, increase in production ceiling. Actual production is lower. And actual supply, which is exports, is way lower. And analysts kept taking the headline number instead of the actual number. So if you look at exports, yes, exports increased, but they are still lower than the numbers. I'm going to show you some examples here. The actual increase in ceiling or in quota was 2.2 between April and September, 2.2. But if you look at the left here, what you can see is since December, it's about 1.76, which is way lower than the 2.2. But analysts continue to focus on the 2.2 instead. So the actual amount of oil in the market is lower than what they are talking about. Then going forward, they are still increasing production. Here is the problem. Every time, every month they announce an increase, again, this is a production ceiling or quota. Many of those countries have already peaked. They cannot increase production anymore. So these are some of the countries that you can see. Some of them already peaked. Some of them will peak soon. So as they keep increasing production, this is the headline increase in production ceiling. Therefore, we are not going to see that oil in the market at all. We are going to see some increases from Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and that's it. The rest are maxed out. From the bearish narrative, basically, what they are missing is many things. Global commercial inventories are declining. You can see the chart. Why the media is ignoring that? Here is another one. US. In fact, US inventories are very low. Here is another point that's been ignored. We are locking up oil in the strategic petroleum reserves. And if you look at the amount of oil we locked in the strategic petroleum reserves since the beginning of the year, and you look at US increase in production, because the bears basically are saying, look, US oil production is increasing and therefore this is bad. This is going to lower prices. Well, we are locking up more oil in the strategic petroleum reserves than the increase in production. So why bearish? I'm not bullish, by the way. I'm just not bearish. So you look at, this chart basically shows the changes or the increase in the SPR, the strategic petroleum reserves, and the increase in production. And once you normalize production, because the changes are related to weather, you can see the correlation between them. Again, sorry, I have to hurry up because of time, so please give me just. This chart shows the Red Sea. And notice the number of oil tankers. All of those are oil tankers in the Red Sea. Remember, there's Houthi attacks, the war in Gaza, etc. These are the number of these are the tankers in the Red Sea. Now, what you see here, what you see here is the Russian oil, that's Russian Urals, coming through the Red Sea to India and China. So you can see the ships, that the green arrows coming from, this is Northern Europe, Western Europe, going through the Mediterranean, and then going through the Red Sea to India and to China. But the Russian oil is going through the Red Sea. All of this is Russian oil. Now we have sanctions, but remember, it's going through the northern part of the EU, who imposed the sanctions. It's going through the Danish Strait, that's EU. Western Europe, that's EU. Southern Europe, that's EU. Russian oil is passing in front of everyone. Here's the problem. We've seen the number of ships in the oil tankers in the Red Sea. These are the Russian tankers. And this is the LNG map. These are LNG carriers. What you notice is there is not a single LNG carrier in the Red Sea. Not a single one. But we've seen how many oil tankers there. And this is a question. Why? Sorry, you asked about LNG. I'm going to skip that. But the issue here is why we have all this oil coming in front of all the Houthis and no problems at all, but not a single LNG tanker is going through the Red Sea. What's going on? Carrying on with that map, because this is really what I want to show you. That was just an introduction. If you look at this map here, what you see is this is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia takes the oil from here, goes around the Arab Peninsula, bring it through the Red Sea, or take it from Yanbu port here in the western part, and take it north. Here, just before the Suez Canal, here, there is a port in Egypt called Ain Sokhna. So the Saudis basically export their oil through VLCCs, which is the largest oil tankers, and take them to Egypt. So that takes me to this map. So they take that oil to Ain Sokhna here. Historically, those VLCCs couldn't pass the Suez Canal. So they empty some of their shipments there so they can pass, and then go from the Mediterranean to a port near Alexandria called Sidi Kerir, and they get whatever they emptied on the other side. That was a long time ago. Later on, they started emptying everything at Ain Sokhna. It goes through that pipeline to Sidi Kerir, from Sidi Kerir to Europe and the United States. Why this is important, why this map is important? Because of this oil on water. It increased substantially in September. The oil bears and the media went crazy over it. And here is a debunking of the story that should not lower oil prices. Here is why. Most of that increase came from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia saw a major decrease in Sidi Kerir inventories. These are their own inventories. They declined in August to almost near the lowest level in history. So they wanted to replenish that. So the Saudis just moved oil from one storage to another. That's number one. Number two, storage in EU is very low and need to be replenished, and it will be replenished from Sidi Kerir. So this is another one just to show you how storage is very low in the EU and need to be replenished. Where is the surplus? Even after we add all that oil and water to the storage, we are not going to get even to the 5-year average. I'm going to do this quickly here again. Here is another thing to think about why oil and water increased. Exports of Brazil declined substantially in September. So total exports declined substantially in September by about 500,000 barrels a day. Yet exports to China increased substantially, while exports to Europe and the United States declined substantially. What does that mean is we will have more oil on water because the distance to China is double that to the United States, or triple that to the United States, and double that to Europe. So naturally, I will have more oil on water. So you have a lower supply, and yet the media is running away with the narrative that I have more oil on water, and therefore this is bearish. Yet supply is lower. Okay. Well, the whole idea here is we learned about some sources of volatility here, and the idea here is that bearish narrative has no legs, And the final point is that oil on water, basically, and its impact is exaggerated. Thank you very much.
We definitely have time for a few questions. So as usual, I've got the microphone here. Please just raise your hand over there.
Why don't we have any any liquefied natural gas going through the Suez Canal?
It's still a question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a question. And I'll be happy to talk about it privately for those who would like to join me later on.
Okay. And Honest does have a meet and greet in the exhibit hall a little bit later. I believe it's at 1 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. So be sure to bring your question if you don't get it answered now. But I've got the microphone. Do we have any other questions over here? Yes, right in front.
Oh.
Just for everybody else's benefit, let me get this to you.
Thank you. Incredible presentation. Thank you. Given that this is the Money Show, in the simplest, most basic terms, how would you suggest we as investors play this situation?
A couple of things here. As you know, for those who attended the previous session, we were in Las Vegas. I was bullish on LNG. I'm still bullish on LNG. The only problem is we have some updates, and I mentioned some certain names. They have some problems. These investments basically are for medium term and long term, definitely not short term. If you look at the oil complex right now, there is almost a universal agreement that we will be bullish on medium term and long term. The issue here is this. When you look at those companies, which companies are going to move forward given the politics that we are looking at in the future, given all the trade wars and given all these things? And are we looking at shale companies versus offshore, for example? Are we looking at big names or versus small names, etc.? So we have to make all those distinctions. But it is very clear that oil is bullish, medium term and long term. In terms of names, the focus should be on all the names that have some kind of a green advantage, if that term is correct. A green advantage means either they have some sort of, those who are lowering the carbon footprint. Because if you look at the politics after 2028, you got to be careful with that. So those are better choices than the others. So those who are going to sequester carbon, for example, etc., they will be better than others.